And with utmost respect, Jacque, they will say, you're a crazy old man.
I understand that. This is not unusual. Every move from women's rights to child labor were fought with battles all the time. No new system ever came in smoothly.
The Venus Project is a veritable blueprint for the genesis of a new world civilization based on human concern and environmental reclamation. It proposes a holistic social design in which automation and technology would be intelligently integrated to maximize the quality of life rather than simply profits.
Undesirable behaviors are products of long exposure to detrimental environments. If we wish to surpass the limitations of our present-day society, such as war, hunger, poverty, and bigotry, we need to make changes and arrange society very differently. Most of our problems today are technical, but we still look for solutions through political means in a monetary system.
We have the resources. Money is an interference because it limits our ability and it limits our dreams. Then the question is brought up is, would this be utopia? We say no, because you can't freeze thought. Everything changes and grows. There are no final cities, no final frontiers, no final language. Everything is in a process of transition, always. Nothing is final. That's the message.
The old world is ending.
And we have the opportunity to rethink everything.
This is a show about the systemic problems in our world.
And the real solutions we have today.
To transition from an apocalyptic storm of war, scarcity, and ecological collapse.
To create an abundantly advanced, collaborative society.
That sustains all life.
You may think it's an impossible dream.
But the alternative is an inevitable nightmare.
We're your hosts, Matt Holton,
Amanda Smith,
and Zachary Marlowe.
And together,
we can move past this economic absurdity
and come together to actualize our collective potential.
To create something completely new.
We are
Mindless Society.
So today is a very special day. We have a milestone for this podcast. We have some of our heroes on this show to talk about one of the most brilliant visions for humanity that has ever been developed, the Venus Project. We have Roxanne, Nate, and Theo from the Venus Project. The Venus Project is a design for culture. It's a vision for humanity. It's a blueprint, a technical way out of this situation to create a moneyless, automated, egalitarian, ecological society that works for everybody. So Roxanne Meadows, tell us, what is the Venus Project?
You just did a good job with it. I think I would start with how this came about. It is really the lifetime of work of Jacque Fresco. He was born in 1916 during the Great Depression, which really hit him hard. And he heard in the streets a lot of information about different alternative social systems. He had no idea what was happening. He was about 13 or 14. And it really set him on a quest for life, for looking for a social system that would work, that would eliminate the hardships which he saw during the Great Depression, where people were thrown out of their apartments and lived in, were fed from bread lines in the streets. Those are iconic photos and videos that you see. So Jacque looked into a lot of alternative social systems. Communism, socialism, technocracy at the time was interesting. And he had trouble with each of them. So he spent the rest of his life devising an alternative system. He was very technical at a very young age, so that played a lot into it. Jacque always said that it wasn't about architecture, which he was real prolific at that, but it was about a change of values. And he was really good at describing what was wrong with the culture, but at the same time, where not many people were doing it, posed an alternative social system. It was based upon the common heritage of all the Earth's resources for the benefit of all the world's people and the protection of the environment. He felt that we should eventually eliminate the artificial boundaries that we have today that separate people and live within the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources. Yeah, it's very difficult in a short time to describe what the Venus Project is exactly, because it encompasses, if you're trying to devise a different social system, you really have to look into everything and question everything, and many different disciplines, which he did, and brought them all together in a systems approach. He had a higher vantage point that he was looking at the problems from.
So for listeners of the show, many of them were directly inspired by the Venus Project. We've talked about the Venus Project and this concept of a resource-based economy, of this sort of design philosophy of designing a new environment to save the world, to save all of us. But we're at a very interesting inflection point where the Venus Project is evolving. It's in a new phase of its evolution, and it's kind of like this butterfly that's beginning to emerge out of this cocoon. Can the rest of you tell us a little bit about what this evolution entails and what that really means for this illustrious, legendary institution to change phase or to enter into a new phase of development?
I think what's important is to also look at a few other things about the Venus Project. I mean, historically speaking, the Venus Project is Jacque Fresco's and Roxanne's creation. But Fresco had an organization before the Venus Project called socio-cyberneering, which is a compound word formed by combining cyber, which is cybernetics, which means to steer in the Greek, and the nearing part is engineering, applied to the social system. That's how we get socio. So it was difficult for people to pronounce, and still is. So hence the Venus Project. That's why the name. Otherwise, it's cybernetics and engineering applied to the social system. So, and of course, the Venus part comes from the place, Venus, Florida. And up to now, and it, of course, it continues to represent Fresco's body of work is, like Roxanne said, the value system of thought, and let's say model of reality. And in some people's eyes, it has become somewhat of a brand for sustainability. Legally speaking, it's a 501c3 NPO registered in Florida. So all of this has come about, has been handed over to in our hands from Jacque Fresco when he died in 2017 to proceed and evolve. Sorry, I just thought it would be nice to get a little bit more before we move on to the evolution part of it. Yeah.
We're all a little bit impatient for the new world and for answers.
Yeah, well, I would say from my experience working with Roxanne Meadows and with Jacque Fresco, I was so honored to be, working with them for the few years that I did. My understanding is that it's a combination of using sustainable technology to bring about a better world, while also developing sustainable human values. Because without one or the other, you're gonna run into problems. And so people right now in the world they're spouting, oh, things are gonna improve because we have all this new, nanotechnology, renewable energy, all these different things, automation. Look how the world's going in a good direction. Well, if we're not actually criticizing the social system, the economic system, which is based on exploitation and scarcity, the preservation of scarcity, but you don't touch capitalism at all, and you want to introduce more technology into it, I would argue that more technology introduced into capitalism is more destructive than productive. Okay? If there's any social betterment, it's a side effect, is a shoot off of the actual interest of the system, which is to preserve profits and perpetuate economic growth, which we know infinite growth on a finite planet is destructive. But that is a problem that I see. There's really no evolution of our social values. If anything, things are getting worse socially for the majority of the world. Not saying there isn't pockets here and there, but that's the danger we're running into, that all these fake technological gurus like Elon Musk and their crony friends are pretending like they're actually there to improve humanity and better things. But in reality, things are not improving, and we have to be able to reflect on our social values and improve the way we look at the world and ourselves if we want to make it, really into a healthier position in the 21st century, because things are really looking bad right now. So, yeah, and also I would also add, there's a lot of people out there right now who are saying they're anti-capitalist. A lot of people. But when I ask them, you're an anti-capitalist, right? Define capitalism for me. They do not even have an answer. Isn't it such a scary reality that we live in, that when you ask the average person, the system that governs your life, that literally decides if you live or die, you can't even explain what that system is. You can't even explain what is capitalism. That is very scary. It's very frightening. We live in that reality.
And I'd like to add that a lot of those people can't define what the future looks like. They can't really answer the question of how would we produce food? How would we produce energy? How would we make decisions? That is what the Venus Project has really been seriously devoted to in a way that no other answer to that question has even attempted, to create a designed, engineered architecture for the future. So how is that architecture sort of being scaffolded today?
Yeah, there's a lot to say on the matter. The real challenge has always been, how do we get from here to there, and putting the actual ideas on the ground and doing it in a way that actually implements the ideals and doesn't sacrifice the ideals to all the ulterior motives and sort of the distractions and unforeseen inconveniences or interferences that tend to destroy a set of ideals, especially those that are aimed at, a better world or improvements in ways that aren't necessarily highly profiteering. So the real challenge is how to actually set the transition in motion, and to do it in a way that stays true to the identity of the project and the history of the project's concepts and values, and how to actually work with other people and integrate them into the process so that you can have a more unified, coherent kind of framework that develops without too much defection or splintering or just internal disagreement. Those kinds of things are always difficult when trying to develop something very idealistic. It's very easy to agree about the ideals, but when it comes to actually implementation, that's where people have a lot of different ideas. And so the ideas you select to implement the ideals, that's where people disagree. So that's really a big part of the process, I think, is managing the collaboration and the integration and, the synergy and all of that and the coherence ultimately, so that you can get a unified working thing moving without too much, internal turmoil and just getting bogged down and wasting time with the logistics of coordinating people to make something happen. I think that's a big part of the transition that people are going to struggle with, whether it's TVP or anybody else working on similar ideas, having a sort of integration process for people and ideas so that it all can start to synergize and acquiesce and acquiesce to each other and, flow forward with more, just a better understanding of each other's different points of view and different concepts, and especially from different fields that are emerging. There's a lot of groups out there now who are working on something similar to what TVP has been working on for years. And, we are interested at this point in making greater contact with such groups to expand TVP's overall framework, its overall models of reality, and potentially the solution that was previously offered. So that would include, a great integration of Fresco's models, his designs for cities, but a lot of it would be augmented, potentially revised, ultimately enhanced by a wide variety of ideas that have emerged over the last decade or so. In some ways, in some cases, as a consequence of his influence. So in a way, it's a roundabout way of him influencing himself, working through other people who have spun off from his own work. So that's part of our objective at this point, is to find those people and start working with them.
Well, it's an honor to be one of those people. And I think about Fresco's sort of evolutionary perspective a lot. He said, utopia is dangerous. The cities that I design will be straitjackets to the children of the future. That this idea of a perpetually evolving, adaptive, complex living system is really at the heart of all of this. And so for his ideas to have created this ripple that other people went out into the world, like many of us, and are working on building it and sowing it into the ground like a seed and erecting it, developing, making this idea, this ideal into something that is real, is this perpetual sort of process that it's an honor to be a part of. And it's really amazing how many people are out there that were inspired. And so it's really doubly inspiring to see TVP come out with a new sort of a new beacon, a new light of new phases, new inspirations, and a new desire to work with all these people that I can personally say, like, we're dying to work with you guys. We're dying to collaborate and to move in this direction because we're all really impatient for change. Sorry, Roxanne, you were going to say something.
Yeah. When Jacque, when Jacque was advocating his program, there really, we feel there was a chance to, he used to talk about creating abundance with technology. And if the culture went that way at the time, there was a possibility of doing that. Times have changed in a lot of ways, and Jacque died as well. And the existential threats are getting worse in many different areas. I don't think I have to name them. But so it really forced us to look at, explore different areas and look to see what was going on out there, and see where the Venus Project fit in today's time, and can we produce an abundance all over the world? Can we make a high energy city without causing the pollution that they seem to do today, and scale that up all over the world? Because of different circumstances and the different areas that we were looking into, like biophysical economics and looking into systems theories, people like George Mobus, and looking into work of William Rees and Herman Daly and Charles Hall, there is a question as to, I don't think it's a question anymore, as to whether we can really continue on the track that we have been with gas and oil and, the derivatives of that. So something else had to be worked out, and we are incorporating. It's not that we're leaving behind what Jacque was talking about. We're really expanding the field and seeing what the options are with the constraints that we have to put on our energy systems. Everything is based on energy, and if we have limited energy, then it limits what we can do.
Jacque always spoke about how what the future will look like will depend on how far we have gone into the future, and how we may have or may have not done a lot of damage. So people speak about, so specifically Nate Hagen speaks about energy blindness. And this is when we take energy for granted in our daily lives and our plans. And when Jacque developed the ideas of a resource-based economy that were pushed forward through the Venus Project, the world was in a very different state at the time. And as time progresses, we find ourselves with ever less options, as he predicted himself. And we have this carbon pulse where we discovered these fossil fuels, and we make miracles from them, miracles of convenience. And if we let's say, if we picture an upside down bell curve, we're at the peak of that curve. And just like before any crash, or like the 1929 crash, everything looked amazing until until it all came to a halt. So just like before any crash or burst of some bubble, it all looks amazing until it bursts, or in this case, deteriorates. So if we kind of rank order the resources, energy is the master resource to whatever we do. And we need to make sure that whatever we use as an energy source has to be easily um, scalable, first of all. That's something that is often taken for granted, and it won't cause further damage to the environment, and of course, in turn, to ourselves. And oil where we say we need to move away from oil, but we have to look at what is oil useful for, and it does things like anesthetics, wind turbine blades and solar panels and car battery cases to build your electrical cars. But we also use it for, like what Jacques used to call, nothing things, wasting it as if there's an endless supply of it on balloons, plastic toys, and perfumes. So when we burn fossil fuels, it means pollution and waste. And that pollution and waste doesn't just go somewhere else. It accumulates over time and causes an immense amount of destruction. And the world that was envisioned in the middle of the 1900s is not the same world that we have today. And at some point, if we haven't already, we're going to reach the point of no return. So our dreams and aspirations come at an ecological cost, which in turn hurts us too, and our potential for the future as well.
If I may jump in really quick and just comment, in all that Nate was saying in regards to synergy and solutions, and Roxanne was saying in regards to compounding issues, and now Theo with the fact that we have to look at how energy informs what we're capable of doing, and we have to be able to come up with scalable models that are easily replicable, easily in relative sense. I'm really excited to ask a burning question about something that we're saving for later in the conversation. But for now, based on the implications you all have made about your recent explorations in energy, would you mind to segue us into how would you describe what TVP is now in contrast to the beginning of this episode as when we were talking about what it's founded on?
You want to go there right now, Zach, or did you want to add something on?
Oh, I was just going to say that that in really dealing with the realities of overshoot and of energy blindness and the hard limits that the feedback loops that we're creating are pushing us into, many people would say, protopian visions or, a high-tech future or, this sort of vast societal change is impossible and we need to retreat. And I think it's actually the opposite, that these changes, these situations, these crises are pushing us now more than ever to reassess the ideas and the essential principles that people like Jacque Fresco laid out of using more with less, of meeting everybody's needs across the board, of transcending the scarcity orientation that money naturally puts us into, the competitive framework, the nation state framework, and it's really nature itself is pushing us to radically rethink society. And though the circular cities that Jacque designed are not exactly what that's going to look like, I think he said that himself many times, like, this isn't the future. This is just a design for a culture. And I think really it's not about the details, as in like a permacultural sense. It's not about what plants are growing. It's about the patterns. And it's about really getting into the design philosophy to adapt this value system to create the best world possible with whatever our materials are. If you drop Jacque Fresco on a desert island, he's going to create some nice domes. And I mean, it'd be a nice environment, but it wouldn't be the same environment as if he had the ability, to use, fossil fuels and high energy and all this technology. And so I think it's really, from my perspective, it seems like it's an adaptation. It's like deep adaptation. It's Jim Bendel's term of what we're really shifting into. So I'd love to hear more about y'all's visions and perspectives on that.
Yeah. So in response to both of you, certainly that's one of the key variables that will have more enduring value over time is sort of like you said, the design philosophy. There's sort of a social philosophy there, sort of an economic philosophy as well. Ultimately, there is sort of a philosophical level that endures for longer just because that's where the values are found, right? Usually at a philosophical level, that's where you define the values and assert the values that are worth defending. And so he certainly addressed that to the utmost as far as the importance of a certain value system. And really, you can design any system that's predicated on those values, right? And it'll take a variety of forms. I would also say that it's a matter of sort of the functionality of the system that he was proposing. He was trying to achieve a certain level of functionality that the current system does not have. And so, again, a variety of forms can facilitate that functionality, and they can, they'll emerge over time. But, as he envisioned it from his reference point in past decades, with the options that were on the table at the time and the technologies and the forms that he had to work with, we get the depictions of the future that he envisioned in his renderings, his drawings, and the various sketches that he's done. And all that derives from the materials available at the time, the probably a greater optimism with regards to the viability of scaling a system globally without too much pressure on the resources. Some might have been taken for granted at that point just because, some decades ago, we didn't really have as vast of surveys as we do now about the global reserves. So it was easier to be a bit more flexible with what you imagine. But the closer you get to, the more accurate you get, the more precise you get in assessing the quantities of resources, and then the increasing rapid rate of their utilization and waste, then you start to narrow the parameters and you start to get clearer about what can actually be built globally or at any scale. And so, he was very emphatic about a certain global survey that would need to be conducted before we can really validly conceive what can be done. What he did up until that point was just an inspirational vision that would get people going. So they'll do that survey, right? And they'll begin to assess what our options are and get clearer about what design is possible. So he always knew that was the case. And what he presented up to the present was, the hypothetical, what could be. It's certainly possible, but with regards to the quantities that we have on the table, that's where we start getting to what's plausible to actually construct. And that's where you have to do a lot more detailed theoretical work and more technical calculation and that kind of thing. So, that's where we're headed towards now. We're moving more away from the sort of hypothetical vision aspect of it and more towards the practical estimation of what can be done as incremental transitional steps. And so, you got to get a little bit more grounded and more just more pragmatic in your thinking, which runs the risk of what I described earlier, which is you look like you might start to sacrifice some of your ideals in that grand vision because you're starting to tighten up the parameters. But so the other point is with regards to the way the future vision can be implemented. So there's different interpretations, right? A wide variety of people have different interpretations about how it can be done. There's sort of more like more biophilic designs, right? Designs that derive more from biology. And if you look at our website now, it talks more about biomimicry or ecomimicry or evomimicry being part of the design philosophy. And so, you can try to imitate nature with hard, cold technology, or you can actually use nature itself to perform some of the processes required for sustainability. So there's sort of a spectrum there between more biological solutions towards more technological solutions, as far as like machines and such. And so people fall somewhere on that spectrum, and they envision, how the ideals or how the aspirations can be sort of fulfilled by these different approaches. And as far as what TVP is now, which, Amanda, that's to your question, is really about, the way I like to describe it is TVP now is an abstraction from what TVP was before, right? So it's a higher order perspective on it, a more complex perspective on it. And that includes what Jacque Fresco talked about as the optimistic scenario. But beyond that is, well, some of the more grounded, pragmatic approaches that we might need to take to make something viable. And that could include more limited versions of that vision. So it might be at a more regional or local level where the implementation takes place. But there's still that place for the global, optimistic, grand vision, which is where he began. And so that should stay in the equation, just for the inspirational effect, but also because, well, maybe that really could be someday, right? Maybe it turns out that our energy issues and the risk of energy contraction and the mineral shortfall, maybe that turns out to be just sort of a temporary anxiety and it all resolves itself, in which case that more optimistic vision becomes more possible, more probable, let's say. And so TVP now, it's just a higher order of abstraction, where this was Jacque Fresco's work. This is what he presented. Now here's other ways of thinking about it, about how to implement a transition, and then what the outcomes might be depending on the emerging constraints. So it's what he presented plus more. And I would say it's sort of a meta perspective. TVP has taken a meta perspective on itself, and now that's what it presents, if that makes sense.
It does, and thank you for taking the time to break all of that down for our listeners. I feel like it needs to be said for some of our listeners that may be still clinging with white knuckles to exactly what Jacque Fresco had set forth all those years ago. That a friendly reminder that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the premise of the Venus Project, aim for a better world for all, is to regard the evolutionary nature of life. And the fact that it's not a linear process and it's not stationary and it's something that is going to change and adapt. And for some reason, I run into people more often than not that are a little disgruntled with the fact that it isn't staying hard and fixed and rigid to the concepts that Jacque himself and Roxanne helped him to set forth. And so to those people, I feel like you're speaking in a way, hey, this is okay. This is what we planned all along. We're going to change and adapt. We're not moving away from the original premise. We're actually putting it into practice at this point, if never before.
I think you're right. And we are really doing the original premise, because Jacque used to talk about the changes that will come in the future really depend on the biosocial pressures or the march of events in society and ecology. So that is really what dictates what we do and what we can build and how we can do it. It forces us into different directions. And if we stay with what Jacque used to talk about, and I would say we're not diverting, that's the ideal that we're trying to get to in the future. But how we can achieve that, it's dictated by the conditions that we are faced with within the world. So, excuse me. So, it has that kind of dual effect.
I was just going to quote Jacque really quick, in that he would always say, we are a product of our environment. And I think that's a really great way to see this emergence and this evolution of TVP through that lens of we are a product of our environment, which means, as you were saying, the environment's going to dictate how we adapt and grow this transition.
No, like Nate said before, that we have to take through this Venus evolution project that we're doing on the side within the Venus Project, is to look at the pragmatic part of it. So it's not the only thing that the Venus Project is doing at the moment. It is part of what the Venus Project is doing. It's a project, and through that project we need to find surveys, people who are doing the closest thing to what Jacque spoke about at that point in time. And that's how we have come to certain people and connected with them, so we can understand how we can adjust what we have to the reality of what we have. And there's many issues at the moment that has been spoken about. One of them is what I mentioned before, with the energy blindness and materials blindness and overshoot, and the double-edged swords that have been spoken about with regards to how we get to the green transition and where the minerals are found and so on. So we definitely need to have a look at the world rather than, so we have to expose our mental models to the real world and to get feedback on whether we can do what we envision. Now, if it, like Nate said, just to support his point, is if it comes about that somebody is working on something amazing with regards to energy, then it's back to game on to what the Venus Project originally envisioned, if we haven't gone too far.
Yeah, I think that the essential failure of our system is the inability to tap into human genius, which is something that Jacque just exuded. You know, the obvious archetype of the genius for me, just the Renaissance man who's, you know, taught himself all these different fields of science and synthesized them into something new. Every child could be like that. Every child on this earth is capable of tapping into that problem-solving faculty, but it's the artificial scarcity that we don't have the very basic necessities of food, water, and shelter that keeps us from being able to tap into that and to actually collectively envision a world that's better than what any individual could imagine. And I think it's that essential value that Arjang really astutely pointed out, the value system disorder, that we don't care about humans, and that, you know, people in this system are cogs in a machine. You know, we, in all this fear of automation, we have automated the human being to pull levers and turn wheels and do things in such an inefficient way that we're not really just systematically meeting people's needs to free them up to the higher reaches of consciousness in a participatory process to create this, you know, worldwide like relay race, you know, to figure out all the solutions and to systematically evolve, so that we have all the people of the world participating together in an open source sort of collaborative design system and process and sort of university society where we're working, all of us, to evolve, to get more efficient, to tinker, to tweak, to revolutionize everything.
So there's something I'd like to add to what Theo mentioned, which is, you know, if as part of this attempt to implement something, and as part of the various interpretations that arise in how to implement, how to reach those aspirations, that, you know, glorious vision that TVP has been presenting over the years, I think what characterizes TVP more now than ever is the concept of contingency, right? So it's not a matter of thinking about it one way, that it's going to turn out a certain way, or that we'll use certain methods or certain technologies, especially energy technologies. It's very much now a gamble, and it's a gamble and a time bomb, right? Gambling atop a time bomb, let's say, and so it's more true than ever that it's a matter of contingency, right? Because as everything's changing rapidly, and as some options are entering on the table and some are exiting off the table, you're constantly having to track what's available, right? And of course, extrapolating from there, what could be possible, and trying to construct plans that don't fall apart in the process to actually implement something real. And so it's the time pressure that creates a sense of urgency, and you're in the midst of tremendous contingency. And so TVP has to maintain that kind of radar where we're constantly tracking what's going on, what are the new constraints, what problems have been addressed or solved, no longer a worry, and what are the new worries, and constantly reshuffling the board on which we're gambling so that we have the most sort of optimal, or at least opportune, or viable, plausible path forward. And So the concept of Venus evolution is trying to encapsulate that, right? That we recognize that there will be some parallel development, there will be sort of different interpretations, different just different branches of development that is common to any evolution. And so it's sort of a part of diversifying investments. So as we move forward and we try to work with other groups or integrate other ideas, there's going to be a natural gravity to some of these groups, and they're going to organize in various ways. It'll be a natural process. They talk about it in complexity theory that there's natural attractors, and those will emerge, and people will start to orbit around those, and some continuity, some trajectory will emerge from there. And from there, you start to get a project moving, and there may be a few projects that TVP would be developing as time goes on. You kind of get one set up, get it moving, and then shift to another one, try to get it set up and get it moving. So, at the present point, most recently, the best example of that is, the work that we have started with Simon Michaud. So, to put it all in a nutshell, over the past 3 or 4 years, as Roxanne mentioned, TVP, for a long time, TVP was pretty much preoccupied with managing the system that is TVP and all of the opportunities that were coming in due to the notoriety, I guess 14, 15 years ago. So much notoriety and lots of opportunities, lots of people, lots of options, and a lot of coordination. So a lot of the time, TVP was consumed with just managing that process and didn't get a lot of chance to explore beyond, the ideas that Fresco set forth. So in the last few years, after COVID struck, we kind of took that opportunity to sort of turn inward and introspect and reflect, and also extrospect and look around. What else is out there? What other ideas? What correlates? And that took us through various fields, some of which Roxanne mentioned, and various thinkers. And the main thinker, though, that sort of put a stop to all of it was Simon. So, that kind of, when we encountered his work, that put our exploration pretty much to an end, because we found what we needed. Most of all, right? For the most part, I should say. The work of Simon Michaud, it presented the closest approximation that we had found to a global survey, right? And he was able to expose some of the energy issues and some of the minerals constraints, and that gave us enough of a window, sort of a preview of what the risks are, and gave us a sense of firm footing so that we could step forward. And so, everything started to synergize, and we had begun a project with Simon Michaud many months ago, and we continue to proceed with that. But so that's an example. It was just a natural gravity. Everything started to synergize, and now TVP is on its way to developing sort of an implementation project. And I imagine that will happen on many more occasions as we encounter other people who have a very definitive kind of vision for how to transition, right? Right now we're relying on the work of Simon Michaud integrated in with TVP, but there's a chance we'll find other people who have equally valuable and potent work that will evolve it in a different way, and we look forward to that.
Simon is great. We've had him on the show a couple times, and I recommend our episodes with him very much. We'll definitely be working with him more in the future as well. And just a little reminder, there are so many amazing people out there like that have been influenced by these ideas, that have taken them and brought them into the now. So we really are, as you said, like, we're drowning in solutions and answers and alternatives, and they're just not all configured and coordinated. And that's something we're going to be exploring a lot in the next phase. Amanda.
Thank you, Nate. So thank you for that treat of an insight on the evolution of TVP. I think that's going to be comforting and resonate with so many listeners, and especially TVP community members. But when it comes to the proverbial evolution, as we know, people tend to fear the unknown. And I think that's probably why more people haven't or can't seem to get on board with this transitional concept that we've all been throwing around here on this episode. And I'm not sure that there's even a good way, like a one great way to do it, and if it's possible to do an answer to one singular question. But if one could take it from a philosophical level and distill it down to a logistical level, what bits and pieces of in real life portrayal could we expect when we're looking at the grand vision of an evolution? Like, what does that really look like? And of course, that's going to be different based on geography, based on existing culture, and as you all noted, based on what the environment is dictating.
I don't know if there is really just one grand vision, and with many different constraints that we're facing, the visions may change to possibly, we already have Jacque's grand vision of abundance all over the world and everybody being housed and fed and clothed, which I mentioned is the ideal that we're aiming towards. We may have to work locally with an area if we're starting with a city project or we're talking about an innovation hub. That might be more of a local project that we're doing. And all of the cities would be localized in terms of the materials that we can use and the surrounding area to make it coincide with the carrying capacity of those areas. So we don't end up with a 6-continent supply chain where we're bringing water, from one continent to another, bottled, things like that, which is a tremendous waste of energy. So what we're looking at is to try and build within different scenarios that we might find ourselves in terms of contraction with energy.
Excellent. So, in all you said, what I basically derived from that is the fact that because we live in a world today that is dominated by global systems, I think a lot of us are expecting the transition to be a global action. But we're going to have to look at it through the local lens. So evolution, we might be able to define it, be able to define it as something that happens locally and is defined within local parameters, more so than this big global transition where we're all doing it in synchronicity.
From my understanding, the Venus Project is an adaptive concept, so it adapts to an ever-changing world. And yes, maybe, 50, 60 years ago, we had a chance to create a global abundance, and every city, we could develop new cities all over the world, circular cities, exactly the way Jacque envisioned it, right? Dome-shaped structures, automation doing all the work, renewable energy, fantastically providing an abundance of energy for us to do what we want. And, literally the book looking forward, coming to life in reality, as Jacque visioned it. However, the world right now is changing. The world's changing. We're dealing with 3 massive problems, as we all know: environmental collapse, ecological destruction, climate catastrophe. That's 1. 2 is an ever increasing rate of inequality, which makes things harder to actually accomplish. Makes our goals even harder to accomplish as inequality increases, which means an increase in power imbalance, leading to problem number 3, which is a rise of fascism and totalitarianism around the world. So that is why really we have to change our values. That's why really a huge part of this comes down to educating people of understanding how did we get into this mess to begin with? When you look at simple hunter-gatherer societies, given the fact that they don't have automation, they don't have, advanced technology, look at how much they're able to accomplish with the meager existence that they live in. Because they have the right values, because they have egalitarian societies where there's horizontal power structures where people are able to communicate properly and women have more decision-making power. They share resources. They don't engage in trade. They're not competitive. These are all extremely important values that people seem to overlook. When we tell them, hey, look, this change is possible. No, it's not possible. Look at the world around you. Look at the crime. Look at the corruption. Well, it's because our values have not been addressed. 1. And 2, the adaptive concept of the Venus Project, which is, yes, we have to change the concept and adhere it to the environment of that specific location. So yes, localization of sustainable communities, that's going to be, I think, a big part of the beginning of the transition to a world beyond capitalism is local communities that actually make do with what they have, with the limited capacity they have, to do what they can. We have tremendous possibilities right now. We don't have to have advanced technology to make things happen. Mushrooms can extract pollution from oil spills. Permaculture shows tremendous potential of what we can actually accomplish with just, adapting our food production capabilities to the local environment. We can create houses, earth ships, which Zach, you showed me about that. Earth ships using junk and plastics and scraps to create really actually pretty sustainable, strong, durable structures that are highly insulated. So when it's really cold outside, it's warm inside. When it's warm outside, it's pretty cool inside. So, I mean, the Venus Project in Venus, Florida is a great example of that. Jacque and Roxanne, you guys put together this beautiful, 10 structures in a 20-acre property. We didn't have a team of people helping you out. You didn't have a massive grant from the government. No, you did what you could with your limited capacity, but look what you did. Look what you pulled off. And imagine, as Zach, what you texted me about, the waste of human potential. That's a resource right there that we're wasting. Billions of people doing absolutely nothing with their life. Just feeding into this catastrophic market system, feeding into this destructive growth system. Look at what we're doing. And just as a recent crisis with Israel, when you look at what's happening, sending $100 billion to Israel and Ukraine, are you kidding me? And then politicians have the nerve, they have the nerve to say we don't have enough resources to provide healthcare or education to people in our country. That argument should be obliterated right there. We have more than enough resources. Take apart all the aircraft carriers, all the massive weaponry, the industrial complex, the military industrial complex, all the militaries all over the world. Take 1% of those resources, and we can create sustainable cities probably in majority of the world. So again, it might not be exactly as we envisioned it, what Jacque wanted, to take place, but we sure as hell we have the ability, because humans are highly innovative. We are problem solvers, and if we have the right values and the right intentions behind our actions, there is literally no limit to what we can accomplish. And, lastly, a great example, I watched the movie, a few weeks ago, Judas and the Black Messiah, and how the Black Panther Party really tapped into one part of what is needed to make a transition to a more sustainable society. And that is providing things for free for people. Given their limited capability, again, they provided a free breakfast program for disadvantaged youth and disadvantaged communities. And that right there was the biggest kick and the biggest threat to the U.S. government, to the point that they actually labeled Huey Newton and the other gentleman, I forgot his name, Fred Hampton, as terrorists. They're like, these guys are more dangerous than Fidel Castro is or anybody else outside of our borders. That right there shows you that once you can provide even the basic necessities of life to people who are desperate, who are living in deprivation, that changes their perspective, that makes them actually want to give back and contribute. And like I said, the human resource, we can do incredible things given our limited capacity if we work together. And that is really the base of it. And that's why the values have to be changed through education, but also if we can provide some limited capacity of what the vision of the future looks like to people, giving them free food, giving them shelter, giving them some kind of a community life where they can actually feel like they're contributing to something as opposed to wasting their life pulling a lever over and over again. That really in essence is a big part of the Venus Project, So that's what I would say.
I'm sure we all agree with every word of that, and I would be an idiot to not bring up Appalachian Community Mill Mutual Aid Project right now for the fact that we are replicating the Black Panthers' mission of creating that third space and offering barrier-free resources to people that help them get through their day-to-day life. And that could be termed on some level to some degree, perhaps if nothing else in the abstract, as a form of evolution. But this episodes about the Venus Project, and I want to hear from Theo if you still have the response to what I was saying earlier.
So what I was going to say is that we don't want to give the impression that what we're doing is that much different than what Jacque envisioned. And Jacque always did speak about doing an experimental city and testing out different ideas and inviting different countries to have a look at what we're doing. And then if they want to, they can invite us to their country and do something similar. So it wasn't that suddenly Jacque is going to speak to all these leaders and the leaders say, go. There was going to be a transitional stage to get there. And with regards to adaptability, that would have always been the case because Jacque always spoke about doing a global survey of all available resources and then living within the carrying capacity of the planet. So in many ways, we're not doing anything different. We're just finding the people to do the surveys and exploring with what we have according to them how far we can get, and that's the project that we're doing, Venus Evolution. So the people who are concerned about that you mentioned, Amanda, that might be concerned that we are deviating from the teachings of Fresco, like he used to say about deviating from the teachings of Marx when he was kicked out of the Young Communist League. It's really not like that. We are standing on the shoulder of our giant called Jacque Fresco.
So yeah, two of our hosts have to leave because capitalism still exists. We are in the scarcity society, not the post-scarcity society. But we will keep. We're gonna keep on going. My question, maybe to close this out in the last leg of this, is for Nate, Roxanne, and Theo to sort of lay out the vision of like, okay, we've sort of explained why the evolution is necessary and the general underlying principles guiding it. But what does it sort of look like? What does it look like in practice for the Venus Project to step into its new phase? I have my own answers that I'd like to put forth as well. Let me go off on a little riff real quick, because this is all it's all connected. And I think what you said, Theo, it's not one thing. There's not one thing that we're going to do that's going to be one switch or one vision of the world. Many worlds are possible. And we're working in our organization and all the organizations that I work with, and in all the places that I've been and the people that I've sought out, people all over the world are building steps to a new world and realizing, whether they even know it or not, as Jacques understood, you don't change people's minds by changing their minds. You change their environment, you change their circumstances, the mediums they're interacting with, the structures around them. I was at a lovely party very recently out here in the canyon, and it was like the whole thing was structured around bringing people together to form councils and talk about housing or the environment or, different issues that affect us. And it was like these people were creating a horizontal structure to society to create networks of resource sharing. And they didn't, they considered themselves capitalists. They weren't even really aware that them adapting to climatic changes and to environmental conditions to create new structures were inadvertently making, their own ideology obsolete. And so really what we want to create is this massive feedback loop of connecting all of these different people and projects out there that are working within their little point, their little component, whether they have one piece, whether they may not have the whole, 1,000-yard vision from space that people like Jacque Fresco could see, this whole world vision, but they have a piece of it. And if we can create a coordination system and organize things in a holocratic way where we're connected with circles within circles within circles within circles, and we're able to change the mediums and change the economic structure of our societies and to create a transitional pathway. That's a key word. A key word is transition. We're building steps, like putting stones that we're using to jump across the flooded river to get to this world on the other side. But ultimately, it's through the creation of this process of the ascension of human consciousness developed through changing the means that we interact with each other and creating transitional cooperative structures that can interface with the existing system without just waiting for society to collapse so that we can create something new. It's creating this massive movement of people who maybe don't even get the whole picture to be able to participate still in this process, to change their world around them, to change the structures they interact with, to change their own minds. So I'm really curious at this point. We interview people all the time asking them for solutions. And usually when we get to this sort of position of our show, we're like, what's the solution? A lot of them say, I don't really know. Maybe we could try this. Maybe we could try that. But you're three people that are so focused on the solution. So I'm really excited to just ask you that. Like, what's the answer? What's the step? What can we do?
Yeah, it depends on which scenario. I mean, that's why, if you go to the Venus Project website, you'll find under the Venus Evolution tab where it talks about the different scales at which transition can occur. And so, if it depends on if somebody is more in favor of the global context, right? Designs for a global outcome, or whether they're more centrally focused on, or I should say narrowly focused on like a more regional kind of transition process, and then even further to like a local level, like Roxanne was saying earlier. It could be that it's as simple as just inventing self-sufficiency in one location with the resources available. So really it depends on which interpretation of the transition someone wants to follow. People are going to fall along that spectrum. And so there's different answers depending on, the contingencies that we're facing, which ones you want to sort of bet on, and then the outcome, the sort of vision of an outcome. Which one are you aspiring for? So, traditionally TVP was predicated on the sort of global design, an outcome that featured total global integration of people and resources and cultures, no national boundaries, etc. And then in that case, there would still be a vast supply chain around the world so that resources all over the place could be optimized for everyone. So, in that scenario, transition is obviously more difficult. That's what we've been grappling with that's what Jacque was grappling with for decades. But it gets easier the more you scale it down. So if it's at a regional or local level. So for example, the work that we've been doing with Simon Michaud, the scope set on that transition strategy is more of a regional level. So like, a network of hubs that develop within a given region. So at the level of like a county, right? As opposed to just like a single village, let's say, like these various eco-villages, they're able to develop self-sufficiency. That would be designs for a local stability. But I would say, so the precedent has been set with the work we've been doing in the past year or so, aiming at a sort of regional outcome that may be able to scale to a global outcome depending on what happens. We're not sure. But there's a few answers to it. I mean, the strategy of the current project is to develop an innovation hub, because it is supposed that what is needed is very rapid innovation in multiple categories of technology, right? So with regards to recycling, with regards to mineral varieties and their manipulation into useful products, and then of course the energy sources from which we draw all our power. So and then a wide variety of other technologies that will be necessary to implement self-sufficiency at a given scale. So, that's one approach that's being taken. That's a bit more ambitious, and it may scare away some folks who want to be a bit more simplistic in the transition strategy. But in that case, it requires a lot more investment, a lot more resources, a lot more personnel. And so then the transition strategy depends on or let's say the implementation process depends on the coordination of all those resources and people. So as a general optimum, I would say, or as just a general middle ground between the various approaches, local, regional, global, I would say personally, what I would put my bet on is the various people around the world who are trying to develop, or what Travis of Aravana refers to as the shared direction. What would be best for everybody probably is to try to converge more formally, to try to formalize what we're doing more and bring it together into shared frameworks. So I'm thinking along the lines of like a transdisciplinary field, right? Where it's not necessarily academic, it's not necessarily in academia. It overlaps with academia, it overlaps with industry, it might even overlap with departments of government, it overlaps with the everyday citizen as well. And so that's generally what transdisciplinarity is known for, is this sort of broad integration of various types of stakeholders, various sources of knowledge. And so if it were to be a formalized process, I would imagine these groups trying to converge on a transdisciplinary field, and they would set out a field charter that defines what the broad objective is. Like, what is the overall purpose of this, what do you call it? Let's just say, what's the aspiration that everybody is reaching for? That would be in like a field charter that sort of establishes the parameters of the field. It would have a very broad scope, because inevitably any task of this sort that's focused on sort of global stability or stability for all people on Earth, well, that's quite a task. So the scope would be very large, and it would bring together the various sources of knowledge that I would see TVP as being one of the key entities in that process, trying to bring people together along with several others. And, all of this would need to be sort of formalized. So there would need to be sort of like knowledge sharing processes, so that these groups are not reinventing the wheel, kind of wasting time experimenting on stuff that's already been figured out. It seems like there does need to be more structure in how the information is shared. So you can imagine along the lines of, there are already some conferences dedicated to this kind of stuff, but not that much dedicated to sort of the cutting edge of what TVP is trying to do, and a lot of other groups where we're trying to like actually put into practice these kinds of things, especially if you're trying to design new habitats for humans, not just like retrofit old ones. There's plenty of information on that, but like building new habitats from scratch at whatever scale, there's not a lot of, conferences and like, for example, academic fields that are dedicated to that. So I would imagine establishing something along those lines where you have sort of virtual conferences or even in-person conferences where people are able to share what they've discovered, what they've implemented in their local regions, and maybe they can transfer from group to group, but to pursue it more in the spirit of science, in the spirit of sort of not necessarily scholarship, but sort of the marriage of theory and practice. But, it would start with collecting the seminal works, right? So Jacque Fresco being one of them, right? Sort of the seminal thinkers who began in this direction. And, Fresco, he's one among others, some of the original authors of permaculture, they would, for example, be another. And then various systems thinkers out there. I think people like Howard T. Odom would be a great example of a seminal thinker in this direction. Bring together the seminal works, right? And that sort of helps set the scope of what is to be studied and further developed in practice. And then you can develop communities of practice, right? So you can imagine there's like concentric circles, like you described, Zachary, right? Where at the core you have the seminal works. And around that, you have sort of a transdisciplinary field that's predicated on those works with who develop a research agenda, right? And upon that, you can have sort of a research program that's deployed more broadly around the world, so long as the network is well connected. And one group over here can be researching this kind of, something to do with biomass, for example. What can you do with the resources in that region? And another group can be focused on another aspect, but it all ultimately needs to be integrated into a shared learning process that builds up a model and, a framework that can guide people in the future. Because a lot of knowledge gets lost if it's not sort of codified at some point. And so there needs to be some codification instrument as well. So, you can think of something like a wiki that brings all this information together. You can think of an AI where all of the information goes into an AI, and the AI is the constant consultation mechanism that everyone can use to stay up to date on what's the latest methods that are being developed. So around the transdisciplinary field, you have a community of practice where people are actually putting into practice the theory, right? Because you're going to have the theoreticians always, but you're going to need to be able to translate that to the real world. And so you have those people on the ground doing that. And then, of course, that's where they'll actually be building habitats, developing new processes for sustainability, et cetera, and or self-sufficiency, I prefer to say. Beyond that, you have sort of what people refer to as the network state. So ultimately, the network state needs to be highly robust and a lot of connections and a lot of transfer of information. And if you were to develop at a higher scale, let's say like a regional level, kind of like what we're pursuing with Simon Michaud, you would want to be able to contract all of that or compress it into a single location. So all that knowledge and the processes, the functionality that's already inherent in the network state, you would then compress that down to an actual physical location, just as you would shrink the global supply chain, as Simon is trying to do, right? He's looking around the world, how all this stuff is manufactured. How can we compress all of that into a single location and have a comparable way of life? Won't have all the fancy, smartphones perhaps, but what would be, a decent life for humans. And you can do that to the utmost if you can find a way to compress the supply chain. So you compress the supply chain, you compress the network state into a single location. That's if you're trying to operate at that scale of like, let's say a whole city, like a 10,000 person city, for example, or more. But you develop all these processes in a distributed way first. And then if it needs to be instantiated in physical form somewhere, then you shrink it all down, just compress it into the system when it's built. So along those lines, there's other ideas too, like there would need to be a way for those groups participating in that network to interface with the monetary system, right? So there need to be processes developed that they would need to share for how that can develop. And let's say at the broader level, around the community of practice, you have just the general movement of the public, right? The sort of audience who's following the developments in these niches, these circles, and they try to get in on it as time goes on, right? So you have the broader audience who are sort of a part of a movement who support these practices. And then beyond that, you have to have what was it? Right, you have to have like sort of, I think, the value of simulations, right? Some people are talking about that these days, where if you're trying to develop a fundamentally new system that works on different axioms, it would be advisable to simulate the process first before you start to try to build it, which comes at a great expense.
That's what cybernetics has traditionally been. That's what Project CyberSyn was, is a way of creating simulations that then the people, it's not machines controlling things, it's using machines to run simulations and create coordination systems that then enable the people to work. I want to add a couple of things to what you're just saying, though, because it's of course like our bread and butter. But the idea of the network state is spreading very rapidly. And I think it's really coming from a great place. It's coming from a very natural understanding of like the interconnectedness of all of us and this distributed sort of culture that's coming about through the internet. There are a lot of very big blind spots in a lot of those communities where they don't recognize the value system. They don't recognize the hierarchical structures and basically capitalist paradigms of founders and CEOs controlling the system are inadvertently creating a kind of neo-colonial totalitarian system that's a feudal system. And we want to shift away from that. And I want to direct people to Josh Davila of the Blockchain Socialist podcast series on the network state and on their sort of reflection of that, of the positive sort of pro-social variant of that, a coordination, which is basically like a new coordination system to do the same thing, but in a pro-social way. And I want to say also that, this sort of society doesn't need to be completely self-sufficient. We don't need to go off into the woods, and throw our iPhones into the pond, we can still interface with the old system, as unsustainable as it is. Yet, as you said, we just need a transitional system that allows us to interface with the market. And as I see it, it's kind of like an umbrella or a bubble where the nodes in the network are self-contained within themselves as much as they possibly can be, providing people with universal services and basically using a collaborative finance principles to allow the people to manage their economic lives largely together. It's not like there's one common fund where everybody owns everything, but it's using these principles of an access economy, of library economy, and just living in community. This is the basic fundamental principle of community: is people share. Everything you have isn't owned by somebody else. People have their own lives. In that sort of holonic sort of scaling out, you are your own sovereign unit. You scale up into your community that you're a part of. You're also the whole. But yeah, basically creating this umbrella where within your own system, within the bounds of whatever structure you create, whether that's a community, a cooperative, an experimental circular city, you don't really require money in the same ways that you would otherwise. You have a different structure, a different game mechanic that is running your system. And on the outside of that, you have this container, this membrane of a cooperative enterprise, a DAO, a company, the people in your community come together and say, what are our economic resources? What can we do to make money to be able to do the things, to provide the things for ourselves that we don't need that we can't provide for ourselves, or that our network that we're increasingly interconnected with, and in recognition that I'm you and you're me, and we don't want to profit off of each other. We want a smooth circulation of the things that we need to ultimately create abundance so that we don't need to track and log everything. But it's also creating new coordination systems to account for actual resources, resource-based economies, and to account for needs. And there's so much of all of that vision encompassed in the show we did at Liminal Village, which is one of the best podcasts we've done in a long time, of a model of this actually working on a very small scale that is ripe to be spread and scaled and grown. In this way, we're interoperating with the existing system while using all resources and transitioning within all institutions in that system to bring us into the new system. I would love to hear Theo and Roxanne's perspectives on this transition as well. And one more last word on sociocracy. Our group is actually going to be presenting a pitch of how we could sociocratically organize the Venus Project in a few days, I think Saturday. But yeah, that's like you talked about earlier, that so much of your capacity was occupied previously by coordinating your own, success. And the sociocratic, holocratic sort of system is a very elegant way of creating a coordinated, highly organized system that allows people autonomy so that, the Venus Project can retain its autonomy of the Venus Project. But there can be other circles that you're working with in this sociocratic mainframe that are not exactly aligned, but that you can still interoperate and connect with them. And you can have coordination without a central board that's controlling everything, that's saying, I'm going to give you this resource and you're going to give me that. So we're in a brilliant, brilliant time. And it's like we talked about on a call recently that like Jacque was so ahead of his time. And now it's like it feels like we're running out of time, but it also feels like we're right on time.
I would say, well, first of all, Nate did an incredible summary there, and along with your wrap up as well, Zachary. So the only thing I can think of adding to that is we need a lot of education. And Jacque Fresco Foundation has been formed to do that very bit, because the main thing that we need to do above and beyond all of this is educate people from this system to a different system, because the way we're doing it now is we are destroying the biophysical environment which we depend on, and we are doing it wearing Prada, and we want to continue wearing Prada while we're trying to figure out solutions, and that can cause some issues because we're trying to live between the systems, and we have to, and that's why in the project that we're doing with Simon Michaud, he's proposed a two-tier economy where we have people getting paid, but when they're living within the experimental city or community, that they have access to goods and services without a price tag on them. When we're talking about transitioning to anything and better world, or we have to kind of sit down and as a planet to redefine what better ought to mean rather than what it means. And it involves a significant fundamental shift in the way we communicate. That's why Fresco spoke about the complications that the way we communicate at the moment are flawed, that we speak at each other rather than to each other. We have to speak about values and what values will help us progress into the future, and the overall structures. This is probably the most difficult part for people, of course. And then everything else comes through education, to redefine success beyond what people consider success today. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but I think these things need to be said again, and that they need to listen to an alternative point of view to try and take them from here to there as well. Because as part of changing a system, when we change an environment, that's how we can change the mindset of people, so that the focus of the system changes into something more collaborative and cooperative. And I mean, why would we want to do that? Well, of course, because if things are going well, I don't have a reason to come and hit you over the head to take what you got.
I think it was all stated pretty well. There's not much more I can add, but just to kind of summarize really, really simply, what Nate was saying too, is that this is kind of like a new discipline or a new science that we want to try and introduce to the world or even academia, in terms of trying to engineer a future. And people don't like that term. Jacque used to say that too, that when you talk about engineering a society, people get afraid of that, but when you really think about it, we're always being engineered, but for what benefit, what's the goal, and for what end, people don't usually ask. So if we set forth a whole new direction for humanity, asking where do we want to go and how do we get there, and designing a society, as Theo was saying, that can really change behavior. It's not just making architecture, but really deliberately designing things so the behavior changes. So we surpass the need for war and poverty and hunger. That's a very different way of looking at architecture, but it encompasses behavior analysis and many other things. All different disciplines together have to work together. I don't know if I have much more to say about it right now.
Yeah, the key thing about it is that, the people who are working in this direction, they develop a common language sort of, so that they can actually make interoperable their processes and their findings. That's been the trouble in academia all along, of course, the siloization where, they have difficulty integrating their knowledge because they've had such long histories, path dependent on a set of terms that other fields don't understand. So I think any system runs the risk of that. If you have a lot of parallel developments moving in different, all in a similar direction, but on different branches, the cost of translation between them grows as they grow apart. And so there needs to be that communication bridge, that information flow, that it's like the information flow needs to be centralized, but the activities not so much, right? That way everybody can be efficiently accessing the information from known sources, and known methods of doing so. So, right, as part of developing a science or, a field, typically you establish terminology. And in a transdisciplinary context, it's usually terminology that arises as an abstraction from all the pre-existing terminology that exists in other fields, right? So that way there's a common language. So you might say system science is an example of a transdisciplinary field. Like literally it's called system science, and it contains many other sort of subdivisions, but in its primary language, it has terms or concepts that are true of any system anywhere in any context in any field, whether it's a cell in biology or a full animal in ecology or even a corporation or something. They're all systems, and they found ways to define, at an abstract level, the sort of the fundamental structures and functions of what is recurring everywhere. And so there needs to be something like that developed for the people who are the various groups who are trying to evolve the cultures, the social systems, the economic processes that we consider sustainable. They need to get all on the same page about what they're talking about and how they're doing it. Just a general, a shared reference point, and exactly how that can be implemented. I think that's a matter of sort of emergence. I mean, TVP is going to play its part in trying to help bring about some greater clarity in organizing this kind of thing. But ultimately, you see examples of it already, like GaiaNet, right? So that's a great example of a centralized source of information where it's a database of all these groups who are kind of working along similar lines. We need other tools like that can help facilitate the integration of everybody's knowledge.
So it's a balance of centralization and decentralization to centralize the protocol, but decentralize the actual actors in the system. Centralize the forest, but the forest is made up of decentralized actors, trees and plants and bears and etc.
And implement it as much as possible. That's how you test the theory. It has to be implemented.
Do it. Homework for the viewers. Do it. And I do want to say also, on the other side of creating this highly efficacious, efficient technical language to be able to talk about biophilic, holocratic, syntropic, all of these terms that we understand that help us quickly navigate through it, is simplifying it. And the beauty of what Amanda's project, Appalachian Community Meal Program, is she's she's embedding the principles of a resource-based economy directly influenced by Jacque Fresco, and she's communicating that and translating it through a food program into a language that the gut biome can understand to Appalachian people who have no education at all in many cases. And that's I think the beauty of this participatory process of education, and of one of the super solutions is counsel, and is participation, is creating participatory processes where there isn't a class who learns and a class who works and a class who makes decisions, but everybody is becoming more generalized in that they're all participating in this shared process that shapes us as we shape it.
Yeah. So a part of bringing everybody together and forming a common language and everything that Nate mentioned, it has to do with also, like, as you said, just do it. But when it comes to the doing, is when people start to have trouble, because they see this personality and that personality, and maybe they find out that Theo likes only white shirts, and then they don't like the fact that Theo wears nice white shirts, and that's the whole thing, is that people have to understand that people come with vast backgrounds, and they might have their little habits and their little things that they do or say that might not 100% agree with every value that we put on the table for a future society. But everybody is in a learning is learning, and we have to make that adjustment to take people from here to there. And some people are more than halfway there, some people are less than halfway there, but they're competent and they understand the intent. And so when we doing a project like Venus Evolution, it's to bring people from different disciplines, to get them together and say, this is what we need, how we're going to get here from here to there, and let's try things out. And that's it.
Well, it's a beautiful vision, and I'm really excited to get my own hands dirty in it, and to help synthesize all that I've been, seeking really my whole life, to put it all together and to see this happen and to come to this moment here in all the collapsing systems, to see and to show other people that we have to change everything. And we get to change everything. And we individually don't have to change everything, because we can organize ourselves into a much more effective, efficient system that changes its priorities to just first and foremost meet needs and deal with human resources, deal with people as living beings, as connected to a living world. I mean, these are not that complicated of ideas to understand. I think a child can understand most of these things. And it's down to brass tacks. It's time for us to start really putting it into practice and testing all of it and creating this evolutionary process where we make mistakes and learn from them, and a process that is continually improving. And I think that it's the fear of being wrong that is keeping so many people from being scientific in the way that they live. I don't think many scientists are really afraid of being wrong. They're actually kind of trying to prove themselves wrong in as many ways as they can, so that they can emerge a new path. We can arrive at a new path by proving ourselves wrong over and over and over again. And that's a big step that a lot of people need to take. But on the other side of that step is this whole world. I just want to say, in reckoning with overshoot, with impending and ongoing collapse, with the failure and the breakdown of our existing systems, and with the deep truth, the real matrix, green pill, that the monetary system is the generator of these problems, not its solvent. That when you realize this, it brings us to arrive at the conclusion of a world that works for all. And, we may not see the world that Jacque Fresco envisioned in our lifetimes. I think if we don't see a serious start, if we don't start moving in that direction, this is it. I mean, it's evolution or extinction. I choose evolution.
Do you want to do something about all the issues we talk about here on our show? Do you want to learn more, get involved, and help us help others break out of the cycle? Step 1 is to join the growing community of rebels and kind hearts sharing their knowledge and passion. Follow Moneyless Society on our social media pages and spread the message to people who need it. When you're ready, you can get involved by reaching out and becoming a Moneyless Society volunteer. We need every skill imaginable, large or small, if we're going to resist the powers destroying our planet. And even if you don't have time to volunteer, you can help us build the dream with donations of any size. We create all of this community and content because it is our passion, but we need resources to get it done. Monthly Patreon donors receive cool perks like early access to future episodes, and visitors to our website, moneylesssociety.com, can buy Moso shirts and other merchandise that help spread awareness. We're glad you're here, and we hope that you'll keep learning and growing with us. The goal may seem far away, but we can get there together.